Working with the Cisco IOS. Can I side tangent? I know you're like, you can't side tangent until you have something to side tangent from. You haven't even started. I know. But I just had this thought, and the topic is kind of around the, I always get the question, people saying, well, how do I get into the Cisco career, or how do I open doors, or how do I be successful in this career? So I had this thought. I'm like, I think I've got an answer to that in a nutshell. So today is November 27th, 2012. It is kind of the Christmas season in Arizona. It's, 63 degrees outside, freezing temperature, and I'm sick. It always happens. Not like flu. It's just the stuffy head, nose congestion, scratchy throat, coughing, blah. I'm like a NyQuil commercial waiting to happen. And so I'm, this morning I wake up, I'm like, I'm not recording. No way. I'm not feeling well. I'm just going to make some slides. Maybe create some labs, kind of do some flow of the course. So about 15 minutes ago, I'm walking out in the kitchen making some tea, and my wife goes, "Wow, you must be rough. You don't even like tea." And I'm like, "I know. I'm going to record." What? What? I thought you're not. I know. I just finished the slides for working with the Cisco iOS, and I'm so excited to talk about it. I can't even focus on what's coming next. I can't. Like I'm looking at the blank white screen, and I'm like, I can't even do stuff on it because I'm thinking so much about things I want to say. And this thing, I got to record. So now here I am. Got my cup of tea. It's hot, and it's helping me record this. So you're going, okay, what's your point? We've established Jeremy's kind of odd, a little freaky. What's the point? Okay, so here's my point. This is now 15 years of training for me, which is weird to be able to say that. And I've gone through a lot of technology. I didn't start in Cisco. I started in Microsoft and Novell, and actually even before that in college, computer programming, computer science was my degree. And I hated them. I hated computer programming when I was in college. I was like, I so much so that I got out of college and I went to Pizza Hut because I was so convinced that I didn't like computers that I was like, I'm gonna work in the pizza industry and further myself there, and then I realized I didn't like pizza either. So nonetheless, every technology that I've run into, always when I start into it, I'm frustrated. I don't get it. I read it and I'm like, I don't get it. And I listen to it again. I'm like, I still don't get it. And I reach these points where you reach these decision points where like, okay, I either push through this frustration until I really get it, and maybe it's listening to a nugget again, reading it from a different book, Googling a different source, posting to a forum and helping somebody explain it to you, or talking to a friend, whatever. You reach a point where you either say, I'm going to push through until I get this, or I'm just going to be like, whatever. I'll move on to the next thing. The more of those whatever moments you have, the less passion you will have towards that technology. You might like, why do you care? Well, because the more passion you develop for something, the better and better and better you're going to get at it, to the point now I'm like, well, how do I get a career? To the point where somebody will be crazy not to hire you. I mean, I now own a company. I've interviewed people to where, some people will come in and they're like, yeah, I've got some experience in this field. I'm like, so, describe a DHCP server. And they'll, textbook, and well, a DHCP server is a server that hands out IP addresses to a client, and then I'm like, okay, you got the right answer, but where are you at? I'm like, are you excited to work here? Are you excited about this technology? And then you talk to another guy who's like, oh man, I just finished my course at the community college or whatever, and they're like, and oh man, and I think I haven't done this yet, but I really have a good idea, based on what you've told me, that we can design it this way and that. And, I'm like, bro, you are on board, because I know, one person is going to be looking at, okay, well, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm done. I'll see you for the day. And then I've got another guy who's like, man, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going home, spend a little time with my family, and then 10 o'clock I'm waking back up, or I'm jumping back in, and I'm gonna finish this network diagram or whatever. So when it's like, well, how do I open doors in Cisco? I know it's kind of like, well, it's the generic answer, but there's no replacing just a genuine goodness, to where you're just good at the technology and you're really excited about it. And you can apply that principle to anything. I'm talking technology now, but take your marriage. I am not wife certified, but if I spend the more time I spend trying to figure out my wife, the better and better the marriage gets, or your kids, or fill in life circumstance, and the more every life circumstance is frustrating, and you have that decision: do I walk away and just be like, I don't get it, or do I really push through and become a master of that technology? Anyway, that's how you're successful in this career. I know it's not call this guy and he'll get you in, but that will, I guarantee you, that will open doors. So, working with the Cisco IOS, this is what a great intro. I'm almost I'm so excited. I'm kind of like shaking. I'm like, how do I even get into the iOS and transition it? What a good intro into the foundation software of everything Cisco. So imagine for a moment that you had never seen Microsoft Windows. We would have to have an introduction saying, okay, well, this is Windows. This is a taskbar. This is how you minimize and maximize and open a program, all those kind of things. This is what that is for Cisco. Essentially, iOS is the Cisco operating system. So we're going to go through and get familiar with it. Well, let's start off with defining the Cisco IOS. iOS stands for Inter-Network Operating System. It is the operating system that has become the standard in the world today. Now, you might look at, for instance, let's take Windows, and then let's take Linux or Macintosh OS X. So, Windows right now I'm talking end of 2012, things may change, but Windows has a 93% market share in businesses in America. Now Apple and Macintosh is kind of creating this ripple effect to where they're like, oh, you've got to get on OS X and you're not cool. But the fact remains, OS X today still only has a 5 to 6% market share in businesses in America. Why? Well, because Macintosh, while amazingly cool, I love the Macintosh operating system, nobody knows it. It's kind of like you are really hitting a learning curve if you're familiar with Windows and then you come over to Macintosh and you're like, where's my IP config? Or I guess I'm talking techie, like where's my programs? How do I get there? How come when I save this file, it's not compatible when I email it to that guy? I mean, like all of those things hit people and frustration escalates really fast. Now, Cisco has created the iOS, which is a command line operating system that is very well known in the industry. As in, if you learn Cisco, there's a lot of vendors out there. Let me. There's Cisco. There's let's just say Foundry, which actually is now bought by Brocade. There is I'm just throwing out some vendors. 3Com, HP. I think those two merged. Whatever the politics of companies. Beside, there's a lot of people who create networking stuff. I'll even throw Juniper into that mix. Now, this is the only nugget where we will mention these kind of companies, and then you are banned from mentioning them in the future. But there's all kinds of companies out there, and all of them, when they create their operating system for interfacing with their device, you will find, for the most part, it is very similar to the Cisco iOS. Why? Well, in the same sense that Linux, or Macintosh, people know if they just go way off and start creating their own world, that people are going to walk in and it's too radical of a change to where no matter how cool the operating system is or how cool the feature is, people are going to immediately be like, whoa, I'm not going to go there unless there's unless you create a feature that is so cool and so irreplicable that people are like, they're coming to you because of that feature. People aren't going to go there. So, learning how to work with the iOS is huge, not only for working with Cisco, but for working with any networking equipment in the industry. So this software and this look and feel, you kind of see a view of it there. That's what the iOS looks like. It's consistent through nearly all Cisco devices. Now I say nearly all because Cisco has other stuff, like for instance, Cisco ASA firewalls. Would be one. They cannot use the iOS on there because that would be a security vulnerability. If they found a security hole in the iOS, then it would also be true of their firewall. So they created their own operating system for the ASA, which you will find them describe as iOS-like. To where it's like the iOS, it feels like it, but there's some differences that are in there. Same thing, as you get into Nexus equipment. There's different families, but they all kind of have that same look and feel. Cisco's goal is that you learn it once and then use it many times. So Cisco knows that the hardware that you buy can be replicated by anyone. Everybody buys the same chips, the same. Now, of course, you could say, well, there's certain vendors that say, well, okay, but hardware-wise, people can all buy the same stuff within a couple years of each other. So Cisco really differentiates itself through its software, and Cisco will describe themselves much counter to most people's belief. They will say we are a software company. We are not. Our primary focus is not producing hardware, because hardware can be produced by anyone. Now, the iOS and learning the command line is more powerful than any graphic interface, which is tough when you're first getting started, because it's a learning curve, especially if you come from a graphic interface background and you're not used to typing in commands to do this kind of configuration. It's tough to move away from that world, but once you learn it, you're kind of like, wow, you reach the point where you're even if you have a point and click GUI. For instance, there are things now. Cisco has the SDM GUI to manage devices that can accomplish almost most major things, but I just don't use it at all. Not because it's a bad interface, but because I find myself facing a learning curve again, to where I'm like, okay, I know if I'm in the command line, I would type config T, interface stat, do this, and I'm done. Whereas here I'm going, where is that again? Is it in this window? No, okay. So people will obviously gravitate to whatever they know. To learn the Cisco IOS, there's no replacing seeing it and doing it and actually interacting with the operating system itself. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of the nugget, is just kind of work in there. So this is a review slide. This is what the whole last nugget was about. So I won't go through it all again, but in essence, this is what I've done. Grabbed a console cable, plugged it into the serial port of my PC, grabbed that end, connected to the console port of the switch, booted up my terminal program, which I'm actually using TerraTerm, but anyone of those will do, and then set the serial port to the settings, and now we're good. Now I'm actually using TerraTerm, which is my nice black window. I'm going to reach down here and plug in the switch. A couple items of notes. Switches, while we're waiting for this guy to boot, switches don't usually have power switches. Essentially, if you plug it in, it is on and working. Whereas routers, on the other hand, usually do have power switches, so you can turn them on and off and that kind of thing without disconnecting the power. Also, I'm using right now a Cisco Catalyst 3550 switch, which is a phenomenal lab switch. You can get them now fairly inexpensive, because this switch is a layer 2 and a layer 3 switch. Now, we'll talk about layer 3 switching a little bit later. It's actually not officially part of this series, but it's so valuable that I want to bring it in, because you're going to run into it everywhere. And so it can do routing and switching together. So what a great device. So right now, what's happening is, it's just, think of this as it's power on self-test, just like your computer, where it's like checking memory. We saw this in the last nugget. It's taking that iOS, that's the image, there's your file name right there, and it's copying it over to memory. It's decompressing that guy from flash into RAM. Now, once that process completes, then it's going to go through and actually start running the iOS. It's going to look for any configuration file that it has, to see if this device has been previously configured, and if so, it will apply that. But eventually, it's going to end at either number one, a prompt where you can just start typing in commands, or it's going to end in a question that will say, "Do you want to enter initial config dialog?" That question, first off, I will say, means you have no configuration. Like, this device has been erased, or it's brand new, and it's never been configured before. Second thing I'll say about that is, when you see that question, always answer no. Now, a little side note as this comes up, this is the model number of the switch I have. It's actually a 24-port power, PWR. That means it's inline power, as in, if I plug in IP phones or wireless access points or video camera, they can actually get their power, their electricity, from the Ethernet cable on this device. It's really, really cool. Now, this is great. So here's the question. I said you always want to answer no to that question, and all of a sudden you see blah, 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 like, whoa, what just happened there? What those are status messages, or some people will call them syslog messages, that are coming through, letting you know, hey, these are things that are happening in your software right now. It's kind of like a log file. Now, if you're not used to those, well, I'll say get used to those. They'll happen all the time. But initially, they may frustrate you. You'll be like, well, I'm supposed to be typing up here, but my cursor is blinking right here. What do I do? Well, usually, if you hit the tab key, now it's not going to work at this point because it's asking me a question, but hitting the tab key on the keyboard will repaint whatever you were typing. So if this cut what you were typing in half, hitting the tab key will fix that for you. And I'll explain that more later. But for now, I'm just going to hit the enter key because I know it's going to keep asking me that question until I either say yes or no. So I'll type in no. Always answer no in that case. Now, you might be thinking, what is that? What if I would answer yes? Well, what that is kind of an initial setup wizard that Cisco has created from moons ago. I mean, it's going to walk you through configuring protocols that just don't exist anymore, things that we just don't use anymore. It'll walk you through configuring like IPX, SPX, Apple Talk, I mean, things that just aren't normal for us to use. Instead, we want to configure the switch or router, because they both use these same commands and same configuration. Configure the switch or the router manually using the different modes that are there, and that's the big topics that I want to talk about. So these are the modes of configuration of Cisco IOS. But before we even dive into that, let me go back to the switch. My window closed. So I'm back in the switch. So this is, after I've hit enter a couple times, it comes up to this prompt, which is considered user mode. In user mode, you can do some limited commands. You can work with the switch, and view some of the configuration, but you can't even view all of it. It's a very limited mode for just basic reconnaissance. Like, let's see what's going on. So before we start navigating to the different modes, let's get familiar here. Okay, I'm sitting here. What do I type? How do I type it? Well, that leads me to, I would say, the biggest thing that made Cisco famous is their help system. At any point, no matter where you are in the configuration, you can hit the question mark on the keyboard, and it will give you a list of the commands that you're able to type in. So I go, okay, well, I'm in user mode. What do? I hit question mark. I'm like, oh, well, these are all things that I'm able to do. Oh, look, I can ping something. I can make sure that it's online, or I can show something. I can view some kind of configuration from this device, or I can SSH, start an SSH session to another. I mean, these are all things we haven't talked about yet, but these are the commands that you're able to do. Now, you might say, okay, maybe I want to ping something. So I type in ping, and I go, okay, is that it? Well, at any time, you can do ping and then do space question mark, and it will give you the commands that relate to ping. So it will say, okay, well, you can either type in word. Now, anytime, and here's a good rule for you, anytime you see something in all capitals in the help menu, that means it's a variable. Like, type something in there. Don't actually type in word in all capitals. They're saying, what do you want to put in? Ping the destination address or host name. So maybe I want to say ping 4.2.2.2 as an IP address, or ping google.com. Would be something. So it's saying, you can type anything there. Or it says you can either type in IP, which would be fine. I can type in ping IP, and I go, okay, well, what comes after that? Hit the question mark, and it says, okay, well, type in whatever address you want to type in. Now you might say, well, couldn't I have done that by just typing it here? I mean, do I have to type in IP as well? Well, no. Sometimes there will be multiple ways of accomplishing the same thing in the Cisco IOS, and this is an example. Ping and then a IP address or name is the same thing as ping IP and the IP address or the name. But notice you can also go different directions. I could say ping IPv6, and then it says, okay, well, what IPv6? That's TCP/IP version 6, the next version of TCP/IP. What TCP/IP version 6 address do you want to ping? Or the list goes on and on. So let me first off say there is no shame in using the question mark at all, whether you're in production or even on the certification exam. You will have simulations where the question mark is absolutely valid, and a lot of times Cisco wants you to go that direction because there are literally millions of combinations of commands in the Cisco IOS. Don't let that discourage you. Let that encourage you, because you have a question mark that will really walk you through it. In Windows, In Windows, if you are doing something, most of the time they have a wizard, right? You open it up, it's like, okay, you're going to install this program. Where do you want to install it? You put in C:\program files, and then you hit next, right? And then what options do you want? Next. And then whatever. It's kind of like next. You hear people say it all the time. Next, finish, and you're done. Well, think of the question mark as your next command, to where you're going, okay, well, I want to, now this is, I want to do something with crypto, the encryption related commands up there. And I go, well, what do I do? Well, here's your next button. I just hit next. It says, okay, well, I need to type in key. There's not much else I can do here. Next. And it says, okay, well, do you want to, and so it's asking me these options. Now, obviously, you have to know why you're doing something. You can't just say, well, I want to do something with encryption and do that. You have to know what this command is for or why you're doing it. But you always have a question mark or a next button to walk you through it. Now, also right along with this is the tab key. Now, I mentioned that the tab key can kind of repaint what you're typing if you ever get interrupted by those messages, which is true, but it will also finish any partially typed command. So let's just look at this. I see two commands that start with D. Actually, I forgot to show you something. I can type in D question mark. Notice no space at all. And the iOS is like, oh, you just want to know what commands start with D. And it'll filter it down to just those two. Now, I'm going to hit the tab key. Watch this. What just happened there? It just said, okay, he hit tab, which really means finish the command that I've started typing. But now the Cisco IOS is saying, well, both of my D commands start with DIS. So I can finish it that far, but now I don't know which direction you want to go. Do you want to disable or do you want to disconnect? So as soon as I type in that fourth character, let's say I put a C there, it now knows I want to disconnect. So I can hit the tab key, and it finishes that command. You will start seeing people that have a lot of experience in Cisco that tab key is like their best friend. They're just constantly, I'm just going to type a few things real quick. Copy, running config to startup config. I mean, it just becomes like second nature to you in the commands that you're doing to just say, okay, let me hit that tab key. Now let me also mention this. Ignore the commands I'm typing. I'm just kind of showing you how to work with this here. I'm going to do a disable. Take me back to that user mode. What was I going to say? The tab key is also optional. So let's say I want to. Let me get back in here. I want to disable. Right. Well, I know. I'm going to type in DIS, which it's still saying. Okay, wait a sec. There's still two commands. I don't know. Now, as soon as I type in A. Does it know which command I want to use? Well, yeah, it does, because disconnect doesn't have an A there. So if I just hit the enter key there, it executes that command. Okay, rule across all Cisco iOS. You can use a shortcut of any command as long as you type enough characters for it to be uniquely recognized. Okay, so for example, one of the big commands you will always type is enable. Enable is actually the command. Where's my pen? Enable is the command that allows you to move from user mode up to privilege mode. That's one of the first commands that we're going to discuss. You will find almost hardly anybody actually types in the enable command. Almost everybody will just get in and they'll go EN. Because that's the shortest version of enable that they can type and still allow it to be valid. Or, disable is actually a command that's rarely used, but disable moves you back to user mode. It's kind of like, why would I ever want to de-escalate my privileges? I want to always escalate, Anyway, well, maybe you do. Well, what if you don't want to leave it logged in? Well, most people will just type in exit, and drop back out. So they're now back in that mode. So any command can be shortcutted that way. Okay, so. Now let's talk about the modes themselves. Knowing the modes of your Cisco devices is almost as important as knowing the commands themselves. Actually, let me change that statement. I'm gonna revise my statement right there. Knowing the modes of your Cisco device is more important than knowing what commands to type themselves. That's a bold statement. Think of it this way. Have you ever you guys remember the game Myst? Oh, I despise that game. It was when computer graphics were first starting to get really good, and essentially with Myst, you would be put in all these different puzzle scenarios. Like you would walk into a room, and in this room, all these different gadgets do things. Like if I click on that part of the screen, which spins the little timer, and then I click on the notebook to open it up and look inside of the notebook, then I'm going to find the piece of paper that only appears if the timer is spinning. Where if I chose to do it when the moons were aligned, I would then progress to the next level of Myst. It was one of those kind of games where you just spend hours staring at the same screen trying to figure out what area of the screen to click on at what time to make something happen. Well, in the same way, think of these modes of the Cisco IOS like the areas of the screen. When I'm in user mode, I have a certain set of commands that I can type in. Now, and you saw them, matter of fact. When you first get in the switch, this little right angle bracket right there lets you know I'm in user mode. And I hit the question mark, and okay, you get a feel. That's it, by the way. That's all the commands you can type in. Ooh, actually, sometimes, forgive me, sometimes I've been doing this long enough that I assume things. When you see a more, you can either scroll line by line by pressing the Enter key, like that. Or you can scroll a page at a time by pressing the spacebar, which in this case scrolls the rest of the way. Now, if you see a more, the Enter key and the spacebar is the only ones that kind of move you around. If you press any other key, like sometimes I'm like, okay, I've seen enough, I'll hit the Q key. It just stops the output right there. Now I hit Q, but I could also go in and hit M or any key except space or the Enter key will stop that output. Okay, so you get the feel, right? These are all the commands that are in user mode. Now, as soon as I type in enable, I'm now moved into a privilege mode. I know I am because I'm looking at that pound symbol on my device. That tells me I'm in privilege mode, which says I now have access to all the functionality of this device. There's no restrictions on what I can do anymore. I'm now escalated. Now, you might say, well wouldn't you want to password protect that? Well, absolutely, but this is a device with no configuration, so there is no password yet, right? So now watch what happens. I hit the question mark, and I go, okay, well, there's some, and hit the spacebar. Good grief. And there's some more. And I mean, wow. Can you see the difference between user mode and privilege mode? Again, going back to that Myst, it's like one mode, I'm in a room with a couple little buttons that I can push and look around. In another room, in Myst, I'm in this gigantic galaxy where anything is possible. And remembering that each one of these things, when I type in show and hit the question mark, each one of these has a whole giant subset of commands that could go in there. And each one of those have a whole giant subset of commands. Like I type in show IP, and hit the question mark. It's like, good grief. Like each time you do that, it's like walking into a new room with Myst where you have to kind of figure out what to do. But the point is, the reason I said knowing what mode to be in is more valuable than knowing what command to type is because given enough time, you can kind of poke around in the mode and kind of be like, oh, okay, I see. If I do this and this, and as long as you're in the right mode to start off with, okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Now don't let when you see that gargantuous amount of commands, don't let that scare you away. In your Cisco career, you will always only know a subset of commands. Like I said, there's millions of combinations of commands in the Cisco IOS. There are some core commands that will get you going, and then there's some peripheral commands those are the ones that reference books are made for. You'll look them up when you need them. So, two modes that we've talked about so far. User mode allows limited visibility of the iOS. I can do some. This is meant for a help desk technician to come in there and say, "Oh look, it's running," or "Oh look, I can ping it from this device." That must mean that it's working. Or "Oh, I can't ping it from this device, so it must not be." Once you move to privilege mode, now you have full options. This is where the admin, a true Cisco admin, is engaged. Now, in the privilege mode itself, sitting here from that pound symbol, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. I mean, there's a lot. But from this mode itself, you can't really configure anything. This is all, kind of working with the iOS. Like you can do some ping commands, and go that way, or you could go do some show commands, do a show running configuration, and see, well, here's how my device is configured, and I can, you can kind of go through and get a lot of information from the switch, get all the information from the switch, but you can't change anything. To change something, I have to start moving into the configuration mode. The configuration mode always starts with global, meaning I move from user to privilege, from privilege to global, and then I can either do some config there or move into one of the hundreds of sub-configuration modes that I have. So let me give you an example. I type in, and here's the command, by the way. To move into global configuration mode, I type in configure terminal. In a nutshell, that means I am configuring my device from the terminal. That's where I'm doing you can configure the device from all kinds of sources. I can copy configurations from other places or do it remotely and all that kind of stuff. But I am configuring it from my terminal. That's the most common place that you configure it from. Now I've just moved, and you can see the prompt change to config. I'm now sitting in global configuration mode. Things that I change here are global to the whole device. I mean, things like the name of the device. Like I can type in host name. This is a global option. And by the way, this nugget, I'm just about the modes. I'm not about the commands. I'm just using these commands to demonstrate the mode. So I can type in host name, Jeremy needs to cough. And I'll be pausing shortly to do that. And oh man, I even went beyond that. So Jeremy needs to cough now becomes the name of this device. It's a global change that affects the whole thing. Or for example, setting a password to protect this transition. Setting a password to keep people from going from user mode to privileged mode just by typing in a command is a global change. So all of those kind of things, and there's a lot of them, can be done from global configuration mode. But then from there, now notice this is where I brought this little cheat sheet in here. I can move into any one of the sub-configuration modes. So for example, this device, this switch, has a whole bunch of interfaces. Hang with me for a second. I want to show you. And actually, I want to show you something. Oh, perfect. So I've got this pound symbol, right? And now my cursor's blinking here. So I'm going to do a show. Whoa, wait a sec. That doesn't feel right. I'm typing my show command right here, but it's at the end of a status message. What do I do? Tab key, right? Tab. Moves me down to the next line, gives me a good prompt again, and now I'm typing my command. Okay, so I'm going to do a show IP interface brief. By the way, that's my all-time favorite command in all Cisco. And I'm able to see all of the interfaces that this device has. Now, and I'm going to stop saying this, but we will discuss all of that. What does this mean? What's the 0/whatever? All of that to be discussed. Just talking about modes right now. But let's just say I wanted to configure just that interface. That interface connects to a key server, and I want to make sure that it's working the right way or whatever the case may be. So, okay, I want to set up that interface. Here's what I do. I'm going to go into global config. So I'll type in config T. And by the way, let me just show you that again. I can type in conf. Oh, I'm so into the tab key. I just hit it naturally. Conf T, and that'll do the same thing. That's a nice shortcut to do there. And then I can say, well, I don't want to do anything global to this device. I want to just do that one interface. So I'll type in interface fast Ethernet 0/1 and hit enter. Notice every single time I'm doing this, my prompt is changing. It's saying, okay, you've now moved from kind of this global sense configuration mode into an interface. So now all the commands that you type, you've entered another room in that missed video game. All the commands that you type affect just that interface. So you'll see commands like, I want to set the speed of that interface to 100, or I want to set the duplex of that interface to full duplex, and I can start doing my interface configurations from here, but everything always affects this. Now look back at this chart. Notice that once I'm in the interface configuration mode, I can always move back to global. Well, how do I do that? That guy. Exit. So I can be in the interface configuration mode, type in exit, and bam, I'm back out to the global configuration mode. Now here's the key. Remember, this is like the different rooms of mist. The little widget, the timer that you spun under the interface, isn't going to work from global. So for example, I type in speed and hit the question mark. not that key. I hit speed and hit question mark, and it's going, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, sorry, total invalid command. Well, wait a sec. What about duplex? Duplex question mark. Nope, sorry, totally wrong command. Ooh, do you see why I said knowing the modes is more valuable? Because you can kind of reason your way through it if you know what mode to be in. But if you're in global, you won't even get the commands that you need for that individual interface. So the commands that are in the interface don't work in global. And the commands, for instance, when I typed in, remember back here, hang on, let me back up. I typed in show IP interface brief. I was in privilege mode. So the commands that I type from privilege mode, if I type in show IP interface brief, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're off. Now notice, even this, Cisco's trying to guide me. It's going, hey, you went off right here. It says invalid input detected here, and you're going, well, why? That's how you spell show. I mean, it seems right. Well, what it's saying is, in global configuration mode, there's no commands that start with anything SHO. If I hit S question mark, you notice there's a whole bunch of commands, but there's only, I can see, let's see, I'm looking for SH, right there, shutdown. So I have this shutdown, which is, it's saying, okay, that was valid, but as soon as you went into the O in global configuration mode, I don't have any commands that start with SHO. Now, if I go into the interface 0/1, and type in S question mark, notice, totally different set of commands than what I had in global configuration mode. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing the mode? Now that is just two of the modes. That's global and that's interface config, but literally, we've got line config, router config, and these are just examples. This goes on to hundreds of modes. Each one dedicated to configuring some aspect of your Cisco device. Now, last thing I want to show you here is, notice I was sitting in these modes. I can type in exit to move back one level at a time. Hang on, this is getting just ugly. I can type in exit and move back one level at a time. So let me go back here. I'm in interface config. I can exit to global, exit back to privilege, and then exit out completely. And now I'm back in user mode. I'm going to type in enable. Go back into global, go into fast Ethernet 0/1. I can also do what I would call a bailout. You can do it one of two ways. I can type in end, and notice I'm dropped. I skip right past global and go all the way back to configuration mode, or privilege mode, all the way back to the base. Or I can be in interface fast Ethernet 0/1 and hit Control Z. And that will also bail me out. Now, I actually like Control Z better because no matter where I'm at, I could be in the middle of typing a command. I could be in interface fast 0/1 and type in, well, the description of this interface is connection to, and I'm like, I don't even want to be here. Control Z, bam. It's like you're done at any point. Whereas if I would type in end, it would think that's my description. So Control Z is the ultimate at any point you bail out kind of command. So there it is. That's the welcome to the world of Cisco. Like I said, if this were Windows, this would have been like, okay, that's the start button, that's the control panel. We aren't really saying what the control panel does or what the start button is for, but you kind of get the idea of just how to move around and navigate. So here's what I want you to do with this. I would like you, before you dive into the next nugget, if you can, if you have some lab equipment, just any Cisco device will do, get in there, start navigating into user mode, into privilege mode, into global config. Start seeing what other modes there are. For instance, you saw on that graphic there was line mode or router mode. You might look at that and say, well, what are those? And start gaining a little curiosity of like, what are some of the things that I can do from these modes? Don't worry if it's lab equipment. Now, don't do it on production. But if it's lab equipment, you can't hurt anything. You can simply reboot the device and it erases everything that you did back to the beginning. So get that familiarity, play around with that, and then dive into the next nugget where we're going to start getting into the configuration of the switch itself. For now, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.